Today, we have Professor Emeritus Steve, who will be taking us through a talk on working with AI-enabled smart machines. And I would like to take a brief moment to introduce Prof. Steve. I'm sure he's a familiar face to many of you, but for those who may be less familiar, Prof. Steve was a faculty member at SMU for nearly 18 years. He served as founding dean of SMU School of Computing and Information Systems for over 13 years and has also served as SMU Vice Provost for Research for 8 years. So that was a very quick and brief introduction to Prof. Steve, in addition to, of course, what you might have already read in the invitation for today's event. So before I pass the time to Prof. Steve, I would like to invite Lynette Goh, who is leading the business partnership team, to say a few words. Lynette, please.
Thank you. Corporate partners, Professor Emeritus Steve Miller, colleagues, students, and friends of SMU, good afternoon. I'm delighted to welcome you to this Top Leadership series organized by Business Partnerships and the International Trading Institute at SMU's Lee Kong Chian School of Business. The primary focus of the Business Partnerships team is to connect corporate partners with faculty and students to forge deeper collaborations. An example of collaborations is helping our partners build their talent pipelines by way of internships and work-study programs. So this Top Thought Leadership series is just one of many programs designed to bring industry partners, faculty, and students together to discuss the latest trends, research, and problems, and for industry experts to present their perspectives on these challenges. It is also our way of saying thank you to you for supporting us. Today, we are privileged to have Professor Emeritus Steve Miller, who has documented 30 examples of people doing their everyday work in company settings in partnership with AI-enabled smart machines. Today, Steve will talk about some of these cases and share his insights from his work. Steve is so passionate about his work that when we spoke yesterday, he emphasized that this should be an interactive session. So industry partners, I encourage you to ask questions and share your experiences with your pre-existing or ongoing AI project deployments. I would also like to extend an invitation to you to reach out to me or our host, Esther, if you wish to explore collaboration opportunities with SMU. Let's give Professor Emeritus Steve Miller a warm welcome.
Thank you, Lynette. And let's now just move right into the session. I have 3 parts to today's session. One is about the forthcoming book. I'll explain in a moment, FOW and the future of work now. I'll explain what I mean by the now, people collaborating with smart machines. Then after that, I have some discussion points about mindsets relevant to managing AI-enabled business transformations. I think I'll get through those in an hour or about. I'll do my best to shoot for an hour there. I might be a little bit over. I have a special section at the end that are resources. They're not lecture stuff. They're things that will help you. For those of you who are super advanced on this journey, there'll be some things for you. For those of you who are just getting started. So you might want to hang around till you see the resources bit, because no matter where you are in the spectrum of your journey on moving forward with this, there'll be materials that are for you, okay? So that won't be a guaranteed takeaway. Now, each of these 3 parts could be an hour-and-a-half talk or a full-day workshop. So that's good news. There's plenty of stuff. Actually, I anticipate that you'll all stay. I wish you would have spent some more time on any of these 3 sections. If so, that's actually a good thing. And, you know, we can always follow up in other ways. All right. So some of you might know the name of Thomas Davenport. He's a legend in the field of trends and what larger corporations are doing with analytics, and then into AI, IT, back decades ago, process engineering, knowledge management. And I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with Tom on this project, all right? So what do we mean by the future of work now? Well, recall the famous quote by the science fiction writer William Gibson. If you don't know William Gibson, you actually do know William Gibson. He coined the word cyberspace for real. He was the first one to use that term. And in some interviews he did in around the early 1990s, he had the observation that the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. And that point that if you want to actually see what's going to be common 3 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out, you can find it now. Now, you're not going to find it everywhere. You'll only find it in very special places, or you'll find it in some places way ahead that you'll find it in the others. So that's what we mean by the future of work now. It's stuff happening now because they're all real examples, and it's indicative of what we're going to see more and more of. The way the book's organized are these 30 case examples, these insight chapters, the conclusions. The insight chapters highlighted in blue are the ones that I'll talk about. I'm not going to go 30 cases. I'm only going to take a few, actually the ones that are local and a few others, and just make a few brief comments to them and then move on to the other parts. All right. Let me just tell you right from the outset that for all 30 of the cases, I have a little table and it has a few sentences that explains the use case for each of the 30. It's part of the resource material. So if you end up requesting the slides, you'll get that table, which is a summary of the use cases for all 30. And if you actually want to find the full article, if you just Google or your favorite search engine, future of work, in the name of the article, in most cases, you'll see it because they all ran in Tom Davenport's online column in Forbes. All right. So our 30 case studies, 30 is not a big number, but it's a good enough number to get a nice feel. Some of them were in pure knowledge work type of service industries, of course, including insurance and financial, and a range of others you'll see in a moment. And we had 3 other settings, of course, involving knowledge work, but given the nature of this setting, there's an inherent physicality to the nature of the work, and you have to combine that physicality with the knowledge work. So here's an example of the insurance and financial services. Bum, 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 you can see the names. So let me just take ones that we're all familiar of, because of course, here we are in this part of the world, we'll know DBS Bank. So the one on AI-driven transaction surveillance, some highlights of that setting were, well, of course they're a bank, and nearly all banks, certainly major banks, have been using AI for decades. So in that sense, no big deal. So let me give a specific example in sorting through financial transactions to see if there might be evidence of something not quite right, because they're looking for evidence of fraud, financial crimes, money laundering, for example. Most of the worldwide banking industry has been using rule-based systems for a long time, and they work well. Even in this age of data-driven machine learning, they don't go away. But the reality has been that most of the alerts that they got were false positives. Up to 90, 95, even 98% of the alerts, false positives, because over the many years, they would add more and more rules. So what would a frontline staff person be doing if they worked in the bank's transaction surveillance group? They would be sorting through a lot of those. Let's say nearly 98% were false positives. And before these platforms that enabled the AI and the analytics, an enormous amount of time was spent just information gathering to check out, right? Very tedious. So you want to do the job of financial surveillance, but most of your time is spent with gathering stuff into spreadsheets, Excel pivots, amalgamating stuff from a wide range of systems. So a few things happened in parallel. Once, DBS since about 2010 and maybe even a little before that started this massive migration on how do we begin using our data for analytics, and building on that base that they had already been going and building the ability to draw from systems all over the bank, they realized that, okay, we get these alerts from the rule-based system, which are handcrafted rules based on years of experience. So there's a reason you want the rules there. But suppose we then use our existing data as well as the evidence of the sort of fraud and criminal cases that we've gathered over the years, not vast numbers, but enough to help with discriminating the training between something that's suspicious and not. And we run the output of the rule-based system through an ML-based system. And then the ML-based system is drawing from all the various data sources in the bank and doing the analysis of everything that's highlighted by the rules, and then gives you a prioritized list. Higher probability, medium level probability, lower level probability. And it not only does that, it's built in a navigator framework. So if you want to say, why is this a higher level probability? It points to the data sources upon which it based the decision to say this has a higher probability of a financial risk. It transforms the work of that frontline worker, because before, the majority of their time was just spent on data amalgamation, most of which was for false positives. Now they immediately go to the higher probability and the medium probability ones, sort through the list, get guided navigation of what to do, and all of the experience that they have that is beyond what the ML system would have can be brought to bear. So have they reduced the number of people doing the task? No. The people doing the task, are they more productive in doing the task? Absolutely. In a given amount of time, they can clear more. And the large number of low priority items, they sort of have an interesting way of saying, well, what happens to those over the next 30, 60, 90 days, and automatic ways of sort of attending to those. So it changes the way the humans allocate their attention. And then as the head of that group so clearly pointed out, bad guys don't sit still. They're always doing new things. So with the time freed up, because now the person doesn't have to spend all this time on sort of case-by-case data amalgamation because it's brought to them in a prioritized list, they can start thinking, well, what's the next thing we'll be doing? They have time to do parallel pilot projects on, well, these are when the rules trigger the potential of an alert and feed it to the ML system. Might there be ways to use new generations of the ML system to pick up potentials of fraud that the rules don't even pick up, and other kinds of elaboration of the fraud? So it's a great example of bringing in the ML, augmenting the capability of the individual, not reducing the number of people that you have, but you can grow the capacity of what you can do with the people you have, not only in terms of transactions, but in the scope of what you can do. Okay. So let me take an example here. These are in a variety of service industries. Lilt is a translation as a service website that companies use to help with their translation. Osler works as a law firm. I just want to say something briefly about this Intuit. Intuit is the company that had one of these do-it-yourself taxes and some other kinds of financial reporting for medium and maybe even larger sized businesses. And the example that I'm going to just mention here, because I'm going to refer to it later on, is a small team of people who worked with how do we communicate within the company, when we write our manuals, when we write our technical standards, when we write memos to each other, as well as when we write the kind of documentation that goes out to the customers in a manual or on a website. You know, as we all know, a relatively small fraction of the human race is good at writing. And also there's like certain terms we don't want to use. We want to be sensitive about pronouns, you know, political correctness about toxic language and things like that. So if you have a big company, how on earth do you propagate that ability of the writing standards? And it was a way in which they took one of these web services, and non-technical part of the people played a huge role in diffusing that across the company. Obviously, you need some of the tech people to do the integration, but a lot of the, well, let's get larger numbers of people to be using this, was then driven by sort of the business users, if you will. I'll come back to this case later. All right, so here's an example of additional service industries from some of the names. You know, Arkansas State University is obviously a university. I want to highlight this one, Kroger. You won't necessarily recognize the name Kroger. They're one of the largest retailers in the United States. They're a grocery store. And as you know, in large grocery stores, especially in the United States, they sell a lot of things in addition to groceries. So Kroger's in 35 of the 50 United States, and every state where they are, they're like all over the place, all right? So a multi-billion-dollar company. Now, they acquired a data science specialty firm to enhance their analytics and AI capabilities, because being a grocery store, you can just imagine the kind of data that they would have and the natural kinds of things they would want to be doing, both on the operations side as well as the marketing, customer prediction, and customer engagement side. All right. So 8451 with that little circle, which is like a geolocation, you know, 0.51 degrees, that's actually the geographic coordinates of where this place is. And they bought this firm. So they have these brainy data scientists who are trained on the details of how to build up the ML models. And they embarked on an initiative where they brought in what are called one of these auto ML platforms. Auto ML meaning automatic machine learning, meaning once you get it set up and you have the feed set up for the data sets, you can almost click down on the menus and drag and drop, and it will take a data set and it will suggest several models. And even if you don't really know what you're doing in terms of the data and the analytics and the technical aspects, if you have a feel for the data, you can sort of go do this yourself, right? So why would a group of people who are the professionally trained data scientists be interested in auto ML, right? Because they can do it without that. Well, for two reasons. Even though the data scientists could do it without that, they, even having the background, were able to work more quickly with the help of the auto ML tool. So there's a quote in the full story about one of the data scientists, something that would take me 3 days to just sort of figure out myself which of these models I want to try, just sort of within a very short period of time, within even under a few hours, boom, I'm there and I go away on it. So there was productivity enhancement for the people who have the depth of how to use these things and who can go beyond the things that you might do with one of these platforms that's attempting to commoditize and standardize the AI. But of course, there's the other advantage in that you can get the domain users. You can get what they'll call insight specialists who are focused on the data and the meaning and not focused on the technicalities of exactly which model and how, and, you know, how do I sort of get exactly the right network and neural network to be doing this, right? So it's an example of the commoditization, the standardization. As we progress, tooling is making it easier. This stuff is never easy, but easier, and expanding out to non-specialists so that they have the ability to make use of some of these tools. And that story with Dentsu, which I'm not going to go into the detail of, is a similar kind of thrust. It was focusing on RPA, robotic process automation, the automation of scripts, but it was the story of how they set up a center of excellence that was then enabling various teams across the company to go do these small things, none of which were big enough for a big automation project, but they all chewed up tremendous amount of time with the frontline working staff. We'll all recognize the name of Shopee. Of course, that's the leading e-commerce platform in Southeast Asia. I had the privilege of doing that interview in story. Of these 30, Tom did 22 of them, and I lent support on some of those for editing. And then I did 8 of these, all the Singapore ones, of course. And Tom would lend some support on editing on that. So what's interesting about Shopee, a born digital company, everything they do is inherently physical, except for the delivery, perhaps. And no surprise, right from the get-go, they're a data and analytics and an AI-driven company. And what's interesting about this article, it's the product manager's role, and it goes into the nature of all the different human decisions that have to come into play about how do we scope, what data do we use, how do we arrange the data from different parts of the company, how do I arrange for my customer service units to help me with data labeling, how do I even decide which of the customers to initially allow to use certain new versions of things, because certain customers won't want to be doing that, certain customers will. In other words, of course, any company that deals with customers, you have your customer segments and lifetime value of customers and all the standard things that the marketing people know about customer segmentation. But what's happening today is people are constantly rolling out new kinds of analytics models. There's an additional type of segmentation of who are the customers who like to be the early users of these early stage versions of some of our new products or services, because the only way they're going to get better is if people use them and we get feedback. Some people like to be in that alpha beta community. Some, it's the last thing they want to do. So it's a new type of segmentation. The other nice highlight that came out of the Shopee story was it had the role of the product manager, but there was a product manager who came from the business side, who sort of the where we want to go and what we need to do came down from the people who owned the geographies and the revenue, and they gave it to the product manager, and it was for that product manager to drive the AI team. There was also an experiment Shopee was doing with putting technically trained people who somehow, some way migrated into some of the hybridization of the business sort of knowledge and staying embedded within the data science group. They would also be a product manager. And obviously, the people who want to drive revenue in a given country, they'll have ideas of features, but they don't have the insight of the entire data set in the way that the AI team does. And you say, well, everything should be business driven, it shouldn't be technology driven. But the truth of the matter is the data science team can see things that the business people can't. And that product manager was able to make suggestions of possibilities that the business people didn't even think of, and it wouldn't occur to think of them because they don't get to play with the data like the technology people do. So it's just the point that you want the ideas coming from both directions, from the business side down and from the data people up. And if you can have both of those flows, you're in better shape. I was able to do the Salesforce interview. And I was able to set that up because there's a former SMU School of Computing faculty member, still a faculty member, but he's working full-time at Salesforce because he was the founding head of the Salesforce Research Center. You know, it's an AI group that they have here in Singapore. So with his help, he introduced me to the team at Salesforce that's responsible for ethical AI practices. Now, this is a story I think you can all relate to. Salesforce is obviously a very big company, right? Lots of moving parts and thousands of employees, you know, many different parts of the organizations. And they're an AI-driven company in just their products and in how they operate as well, all right? The team that is responsible for ethical AI practices up to very recently was all of, you ready for this? Two people for all of Salesforce. Now it's expanded a little bit. I don't know what exactly the number is. It's 3 or 4 or 5, but the point is it's still small. Now, what was remarkable is that very small team was remarkably effective at approaches to propagate the approach of ethical AI through education programs, online modules they created, through creating frameworks, through being on the lookout for tools externally that can be used in ways that would help people. A tool that was super helpful to them is a development by Google called Model Cards, and a simple description of it is, it's as if it's a nutrition label, what a nutrition label and a description of ingredients is for the things you buy at the grocery store. It's that kind of thing for the model about its inputs and outputs and how it works. And that standardization of approach of describing it helped people a lot. The other point that she made was you can have all the sort of premises and principles you want for ethical AI practices, and most people will say, sure, sure, sure. But the hard part is contextualizing it. In my particular work, in my particular situation, how does that apply? And she spent a lot of her time advising the teams how to contextualize, and then the teams would be responsible for moving forward and implementing the ethical practices. In healthcare, let me take our one local example, Good Doctor Technology. Some of you might not know of them, so let me just describe the mighty Ping An Health in China, the world's largest AI-based mobile telemedicine platform. They have vast numbers of users. Ping An Health obviously comes from Ping An, the insurance company that turned itself into a gigantic technology power, both in insurance, in health, in fintech, and some other areas. All right. So this is a collaboration between Ping An Health as well as Grab. All right. So the capability for the telemedicine all comes from the Ping An side, and the access is through the Grab app in Indonesia. So in Indonesia, for the button that says Grab Health, underneath it is Good Doctor Technology, and underneath Good Doctor Technology Southeast Asia is the platform from Ping An Health in China. So there's two, I think, big takeaways from this example. One is it demystifies. You say, well, telehealth. Well, obviously there are parts of health that you cannot do through telehealth. And in fact, the way they got started wasn't even video, it was with chat. So you'd say, how can that be helpful? Well, recall that a lot of people who walk into hospitals don't need to be in hospitals, right? They're looking for basic information, or it's something a GP could happen. So what could happen if you could have a pre-screen where you, using your chat, you start an interaction, and very first they're trying to say, do you just want basic health information, or do you just want something about the promotion for vitamins we're selling, or do you have an actual medical problem? So they do that splitting. And then if it's like, oh, you have like a real medical consultation, is it like an emergency? Let's not even talk about it. You need emergency help. That's not for us. You better go call the ambulance and get yourself to a doctor. Is it one of those kind of things? Or is it something standard? A lot of people have a sniffly nose, they have a cold. There's some non-COVID like thing going around, for example. Some standard simple thing, or it's something that's not so dangerous, but it's a little more complicated. So the story explains how they do that triage. The other big takeaway point from this is the localization was a massive effort. Of course, Ping An Health had this all figured out in China, but it's with Chinese language. So to build an intermediary so that they could use it in Indonesia and now Thailand, and as they expand in Southeast Asia, they built an English language thing. But the ways people use language to describe things in Indonesia are different than in China. They're idioms, they're metaphors, they're just ways people say that. All of that has to be localized. In addition, we have dengue fever a lot here. They don't have it in China as much. And similarly, there's some diseases there that are more prevalent that wouldn't be so in Indonesia. So the localization effort, very, 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 very time consuming. So interesting story, okay. PCB Linear, you never would have heard about it. It's a small machine shop in the United States. What was interesting is they were having trouble hiring machinists because the young people didn't want to go to apprentice, like they used to do in years back. So how are they going to get people to keep up with their output as their older machinists are retiring and younger people aren't doing that kind of vocational training? So some of you have heard of the HoloLens by Microsoft, and it's gone through a few generations already. And a vendor took that HoloLens, the latest, greatest iteration, and built into it a step-by-step documentation. So you can create documentation for doing procedures like, oh, if you're going to get started on this machine, do this first, do this second, do this third. So it's sort of like a tutor walking you through how to use the machine. And because there's physicality to this task, you need to have your hands busy. You can't be turning manual pages. You see it in the HoloLens. So it was able to help new people come in and get on board. Similarly, the engineer who was responsible for, let's say, several of the machines in the factory was able to use this same HoloLens with not just the HoloLens, but with this particular application for the machine and the operations and the maintenance support. And he was able to use it to self-teach himself how to use new machines in the factory. Super cool example of using the AI combined with virtual reality to increase access, to make it possible for people to be employed, okay? And I'm just going to make my final points. Certus, we all know Certus here in Singapore, of course, they're the dominant player in the security services. I don't know if any of you have been to Jewel at Changi Airport. It's the incredible mega mall with the world's largest indoor waterfall. Certus does more than security there. They do all of the guest services, they do the security, and they do a lot, if not all, but a lot of the facility support. And the story there was through the combination of data digitalization, using a wide range of technologies and AI support, they were able to give the ground staff a mobile tool. Obviously, they have the mobile phone, but an application on the mobile phone that made it so much easier to submit incident reports. Incident reports were sort of the bane of the security industry. The guards hated to do them. If they were small things, they wouldn't even bother to do them. Even if they do them, often their supervisor would have to rewrite them. You know, the security guards, some of them could be in their late 50s, 60s, even older. Some of them might not speak English so well. Writing incident reports was not their sort of favorite thing, right? Sort of very tedious for everyone. So they completely simplified that to the point where if you're a guest services person, not even the security person, you're still eyes on the ground. You now can easily submit what you think is a suspicious security issue. Or if you're a guest service person or the security person and you see the elevator's not working, rather than wait till the security guy discovers it, it's so easy to submit the incident reports that they can cross-train now. So using this tool, it made it easier for the older people, actually, and it also made it easier for the cross-function. Then they had a mission control smart operations center. They have thousands of sensors, literally, I'm not over-exaggerating here. Video, other kinds of sensors. Chengi Jewel has all this elaborate flora, all the shrubbery. They have to monitor the environment very carefully. And they have people in mission control looking at all of this, but humans can't just stand and wait for every incident. So we need AI-based analysis for the when are incidents happening, when are events happening. But you still need the people there because all kinds of unusual things happen. You do get false positives. Whenever something does happen, you have to coordinate the manpower to go take a look at it. You never quite know what you find. There's got to be a lot of elaborate coordination and communication. So even with the heavy use of the digital technology together with the data and the AI, it's all built around the people. Now they are more productive. They hired new people and increased employment to take on a job like Jewel and to take on some of the new jobs that they've been able to win as a result of this new technology enhanced approach to security and related services. So they've increased employment, but if you were to compare it to the conventional approach, they can cover a big complicated facility with what would have been, in the old days, it would have taken them much larger numbers of people to do it. Now they can do it with a smaller number of people. The people are enhanced with the mission control and the sensors, and the people coordinate better and do cross-functional work because of the technology support. So it was a great example there. All right, so let me just sort of move on. When Tom and I did this, a few things. We would not touch anything R&D. We wanted real work. If some company was using something, but it was a trial off in a corner, nope, we wouldn't do it. We wanted stuff that was all everyday, real production work, all right? So in that sense, some of these examples we have, they're using technology in quite sophisticated ways, but the story of the work is very every day. It's like, well, that just seems like everyday work. And that's exactly the point of what we were looking for, to show how this partnering of the human and machines really is becoming just what everyday work will be about, already happening for some people. And like William Gibson said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. This will be propagating out. Because we know AI is used in every industry and nearly every application you can think of already, but it's not evenly distributed. It's highly concentrated in a very small number of firms. I don't just mean like the Amazons and the Microsofts and the Googles, but you take your DBSs of the world or what Certus has done. They're at the sort of leading edge for the non-superstar firms. And what about the other 80% of the population of firms? They're in a much earlier stage of this diffusion happening. So we focused on the frontline worker, but to tell this story, in every one of the 30 interviews we did, some subset of these other roles had to be part of the interview, because without them, you couldn't get the story. So I don't want to confuse here, We did not interview all of these roles in all 30, but across all of the different interviews, in every interview, we probably, talked to 2 or 3 of these roles. And you could see that all of these roles are involved. And going to the next slide, this visual was made to be a little complicated. It's a generic organization chart. It's not the organization chart for any particular company, but it's a generalization and an abstraction of what the organization chart is for any company, right? And, if the frontline worker at whatever job role, job level they're there in the middle. And even if you're not doing this big corporate thing, even if you're doing this very focused task-based thing for one business function, you still have a lot of this alignment, integration, coordination with everything above, with everything below, with the AI platforms and the regular IT applications to the left, and the various sort of spanning and corporate spanning roles to the right. Meaning, okay, there's auto ML that makes it easier, or that kind of technology makes it easier to some extent, but organizational deployments aren't easy. There's just no such thing as an easy organizational deployment. I'll come back to that point. We also found this bit about everyone's a techie to some degree. That doesn't mean they know the details of the innards of computers. It doesn't mean they can write algorithms or set up a neural network. You have your specialists who can do that, but there's a lot of hybridization going on. Now, you're all familiar with business IT alignment and the gap. And that's an old story. I mean, it goes back to the very origins of the use of computers in business settings. Of course, in the 70s, you had the systems analysts. That grew into the role of the business analyst. The business analyst has been formalized as a profession. But has the increase in the number of business analysts solved the business IT alignment gap? Of course not, right? Do we still have this business IT alignment gap? You ask yourself in your respective company. Of course, that gap exists to varying degrees. It's inherent in the way organizations work. But we did find all over the place these business IT hybrids. I made a reference to the person at Intuit, the company that does the do your own taxes and some other, financial applications for businesses. The group that wanted to propagate this, here are our rules for how we do internal writing. Here are, our rules and support for how we write and get editing help for it when we put stuff in a manual. And the person who drove that project was all self-educated, did not come from a technology background, but really embraced using this new application, getting hundreds of others, thousands of others to use it across the company. And we just found example after example after example there. I think the point is the extent to which the business IT gap, which will never disappear, but to the extent that we see glimmers of hope, only a small fraction of that improvement is due to additional business analysts in the traditional sense of that job role. Tom and I think the bigger effect is this hybridization. So of course, as much digital transformation and all the buzzwords that's going on now, we're still at the beginning. More of this is coming. So how are you as a company preparing, facilitating, catalyzing these hybrid roles? Some of it happens by osmosis. People just sit in project meetings and they pick it up. But and we have to realize that both the business side and the tech side is both broad and deep. You can have all the hybridization you want. Nobody can know everything. Just the knowledge base is too broad and too deep on both the domain and business side as well as on the tech side. But then how do you have curated pathways for hybridization of the people, of the business people on the conceptual understanding of what the tech can do for them and really understanding the capabilities and limitations. And similarly with the tech people on the business side. Now, some of you do that already, but how do you roll that into your talent management in a formalized, structured way and realize that this hybridization to varying degrees and varying types, because even within hybrids, you'll have different kinds of specialties and emphasis. How do you roll that into your HR? All right. One thing that's important both for companies and for society is this issue of opportunities for entry-level work. How do you bring new people in? New people come in like two flavors. There's the fresh hires, the young people, of course, and they can come from different education streams. And then there's the mid-career hires who, for whatever reason, they're changing careers, they got retrenched, they need to restructure, whatever, they're coming from some other industry and they're coming into yours, all right? And there's this issue of, I gave you the example of DBS in the surveillance transaction management, where they've increased their productivity, and similar in Certus, similar for all 30 of these examples. Well, that increases the capacity of the people currently working, and all of the firms are able to do more with their existing resources. That leads in the productivity direction. But am I eliminating jobs in the sense of silent firings? In all the companies we work with, nobody eliminated people, all right? There's a footnote or two on that in some cases for demand. One of the companies, Stitch Fitch, laid off people in some locations, but then hired people in others. So, of course, you always have that kind of thing. But in the main, nobody was reducing their aggregate headcount. In fact, because they were successful users of the technology, for the most part, they were increasing. But are we eliminating opportunities for young people to come in? And similarly, what about the pipeline? To have people with 10 years experience, 10 years from now, you need new people coming in now. Now, this is really important. Some of the firms we interviewed, the frontline workers explicitly raised comments that the people we need to hire now need to have a lot of experience, because if they're working together with these AI support systems, they need to have the experience to know if the prediction of the support system is wrong or not. And a new hire can't do that. So we don't want to hire new hires. We only want to bring in experienced people. But if you keep doing that, how do you grow experienced people? So that's a problematic issue. I gave you the example of the machine shop where they use the HoloLens together with an application that specifically made it possible to bring in people who didn't have the skills, right? So we see the other side. In a number of the examples that we have, these support systems were designed to improve the productivity of the existing workforce. And they were not designed to make it easier for new employees to come in. But it turns out that a byproduct of, given the way that they were designed and the way that they did what they did to help the frontline experienced worker do the job more easily, they actually do provide certain kinds of performance support that would make it easier if you did choose to bring in a new person. So on one hand, the productive capacity increase is, well, I can continue scaling without bringing in a new person. And then on the other side is, if I did bring in a new person, this gives them scaffolding, in some ways guidance, right? The Certus example is an example of increasing access. People who are of a certain age can maybe work for a longer number of years because of the support of the digital tool, making this all so much easier. In Dentsu, where they went on this RPA campaign, they did a special arrangement, in addition to working with their regular employees, with the Autism Society. and they work with autistic people, some of whom are just perfect for doing RPA stuff. And it's an example where the technology created access to others who wouldn't have had it. So there are issues if we don't have opportunities for entry-level workers. I'm going to get to that in a moment because it depends on this issue of labor cost reduction versus productivity improvement. I'm going to come back to this. How do we get people to gain experience to come into the companies? I just facilitated a panel for the Accounting Society in Singapore. And we had people from Singtel, from a government agency, a medium company, a small company, and they all said one key result that we get from bringing in these data-driven AI systems and everything you need to do for the underlying sort of data support is our own people don't have to spend as much time on grunt work, just putting data together, just, like doing spreadsheet pivots or, stuff that's analogous to that. And they said, well, that's what we used to have some of our new hires do. So as some of the traditional training grounds for new hires within your company are going away, how do we rethink? How do we bring in new people, and what do we start them with gaining experience? Now, for highly educated people coming out of SMU and all the Singapore, the major Singapore research intensive organizations, the highly educated tend to do fine. But what about people at different levels of education? How are they going to get experience? So are we diminishing opportunities for entry-level workers? The answer is emphatically yes and no at the same time, simultaneously. Both those forces are interplaying, and we don't know how it's all going to play out. Nobody knows how it's going to play out. It depends. So in summary, human work isn't going away. Do not waste your time worrying about when are these so-called AI-enabled machines putting us all out of work. That's just not happening. It's not happening now. It's not happening in the next few years. It's not happening in decades, all right? And beyond that, you don't have to worry about it for practical purposes. Now, when I say things are moving slowly and expensively, obviously AI is moving very quickly, but deployment within an organization is complex and slow, all right? Be prepared to work with AI. The threat isn't whether AI is going to take over your job. The threat is that you choose not to get involved in learning how to work with an AI partner through an application. Because if you don't, there'll be less role for you. So focus on how do you team with the new technology. You don't have to be a developer or creator. You have domain knowledge. How do you team with this in a partnership kind of way? All right. Automation works well. It really does. All right. Full statement. Now, there are many degrees of it. And what are the boundaries between augmentation, not automation. Augmentation, where the human and the machine work together. What are the boundaries between that and automation? And there's like a system of system things. So that's a long discussion in itself. I won't get into that. But augmentation works well. More of this is coming. Now, when the singularity comes, what happens? Tom likes that phrase, and he sort of has this whimsical way of saying, when the singularity comes, all bets are off. I think it's an erroneous concept. I don't believe there's going to be a singularity. I believe machines, and I know what these machines do, will increase phenomenally and be able to do remarkable things, but you're not going to have this kind of singularity that people are talking about. It really comes down to, do you think the future is like the movie The Matrix? Or do you think the future is like the Star Wars movie, where the humans are still sort of the main part of the plot, and they have all kinds of fantastic machines working with them, versus the Matrix? Okay, let me just go through this very quickly. It's not summarizing the book, but it's summarizing some important themes related to the book. All right. So dynamic tensions, fast and slow. And then this other dynamic tension, exceeds and inferior. And what do I mean by dynamic tension? See that yin-yang sign? You know, in this part of the world, we really know what that yin-yang sign means. It's opposing forces. It's opposites. But the key to the yin-yang thing is it's opposing forces that coexist, not temporarily, but all the time. And you'll see what I mean by the coexistence of the dynamic tensions of this fast and slow, exceeds and inferior relative to AI. So this is what I mean between the fast and slow. All right? You can read it. You can see it right here. The organizational deployments are slow. Even if you're good, they're time intensive. Even if you're good, there's a learning curve and you get faster at it. But then you stop doing familiar things and you go for the next big sort of step level change. It's always complicated. And yet, as we know, by those who follow the technology, however you choose to follow it, from your vendors or the announcements or the conferences or the working papers, it's just moving really fast. And not always incrementally too. Sometimes some really big, important things are happening, as they have in recent times, as you'll see in the resource section. And for reasons you all know, I'm not going to go bullet point by bullet point. You can look at these and say, oh God, my company, you wouldn't believe how long it takes to do any of these bullet points, right? So, you know, that's my question to some of the audience. How do you, in your company culture, how do you deal with these two different clock speeds that are so radically different? The fast rate of change of the state-of-the-art algorithms and methods, and the fact that deployment is slow. Once you put in a platform, once you're using methods, you don't want to yank them all out. You move very gradually. So I wanted to open it up to some of the companies. You know, do I have people, for example, from Cargill on the line? You know, because I know there were some signed up. You know, can one of you tell me how, in your own head, in your own company, how you deal with these coexisting, opposing worlds, right? Because it's dizzying to follow on the left side, and it's ponderous to sort of make the continuous change be happening on the right side. All right, so that's my question. Now, I'm not hearing anybody, and I can't see you. And, you know, I've got 58, 57 participants here. Anybody want to share? If not, I'll move on, but I'm giving you the space and the time to share. All right. Now, there's this other version of it that I don't have an answer to. I'm sort of curious how you deal with it in your organization. And I'm on the left side, I'm not talking about R&D. I'm talking about the real world, the work setting, your project, your setting that, you know, the bosses, the board of director, the investors, they all know the field is moving so fast. They're into all this, you know, sprints, agile, hey, whatever obstacles we have, just bring in the consultants, they'll move us fast. And even to some extent, you can do that. There's no way you can get across the fact that you got to go step by step, gradually and slowly. Every company sort of has its own way of negotiating these pressures and whatnot. Personally, I'm sort of interested in talking to people about different ways and different companies do this, not philosophically, but on the ground, how that really happens, how you sort of find coping mechanisms for this, because there's a lot of pressure. Now, here's what I mean by the exceeds and inferior. AI applications exceed some aspects of human capability, and AI applications is inferior to other aspects of capability. Now, some of you will say, well, that's just a temporary thing, because just wait 2 years, or wait 5 years, or wait 10 years, and AI will exceed humans in everything. That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. and the experts closest to it, the people who drove the machine, the deep learning revolution, and the people closest to this, like if we could get to the intelligence of a cat or a dog, we'd be happy, and even that's within a number of years from now, right? So when we say AI exceeds some aspects of human capability, no surprise here. This shouldn't be a big thing. The AI stuff's a tool. It's a machine. And why do we use machines? Because they can do things better than we can do. We've been using machines for hundreds, thousands of years because they do things better than humans. We've been using computers since the 40s, maybe say early 50s. It's obvious they do computational things better, faster than humans. And now we can do the kinds of things where I'm not going to go bullet point by bullet point, but optimizing over many parameters, pattern recognition, correlations that are very complex in multidimensional space. In short, given validated models and given accessible data, we can make predictions, classification being a special kind of prediction. We can make consistent choices. We can make optimizing choices, risk minimizing choices with our machines and our data, and automate that better than humans could do that. But notice this last statement at the bottom. Only when the present is the same as the past. And you have to ask yourself, for a lot of your transactions, the present is the same as the past. But for some of your most important things going on, the present is not the same as the past. We do not know how to do that kind of prediction. And scaling these remarkable machines, even the GPT-3-like machines, isn't going to solve that problem. All right. Humans, with all their buggy flaws, have some remarkable capabilities. You just read the bullet points listed here. I'm not going to go item by item. You can quickly see. And you say, is that important in my business environment? Well, obviously, it's important in your business environment. Bridging from the current environment to a new environment. Situation assessment under new circumstances. Is something plausible? Do I understand how it's happening? I don't mean do I understand why the machine learning model made its thing, but I mean the larger phenomena. Why am I seeing what I see in the world? If a machine can understand context, but only if that context is already in some website data corpus that's already pre-existing. If the context isn't shown, if it can't be searched and retrieved, if it's implicit, no matter how we scale these machines, they can't do it, okay? So what I think's happening is the pendulum has swung the other way. Years back, people say, oh, these machines will never be able to do X, Y, and Z. Now we see all these examples of the remarkable prediction that can be done with not only the deep learning revolution that's come basically since about 2010 and has really picked up steam the last 5 years, but combining that also with other aspects of AI, the reinforcement learning, and even the older rule-based learning, all of these things combined together. And we really can do remarkable things. The famous roboticist, Rodney Brooks, he's the one who created the company that gives us the iRumba vacuum cleaners, and he's been a pioneer in robotics, and he's been building advanced machines for decades. He reminds us anything real has limits. If it does not have limits, it is not real. I mean, if you want to take that to an extreme, even the speed of light has a limit, for goodness sakes. Any tool, any machine has a limit. But I think now people are over-ascribing the capabilities of the smart machines. Now, they are getting better and better and better, but they have limits. And I think we're undervaluing and appreciating, as buggy as it is and as moody and as emotional as it is, the capabilities of what humans can do. So, that leads us to this issue of how we combine. All right, as I'm wrapping up, let me just make a final point. And this is important. This is important to your company, and it's important to your city and your society and your stability in an economic system. Labor cost reduction versus productivity improvement. There are a lot of people who say, look, I want to simplify this. The technology is hard enough in itself, right? I've got all these challenges, my complex domain, all the new things I need to do with the that I have to learn about using the technology, embedding it in my process. Let's make life simple. All I want to do is reduce my labor cost. I'm not going to drive capability enhancement in a strong way. Just help me reduce the labor cost versus really going for the productivity uplift. And what happens is when you just go for the labor cost and you don't really drive the other capability and capacity enhancement, the displacement effect is greater than the productivity effect. First off, your workers aren't going to support the efforts. They're not going to share their knowledge, or if they did, they're going to stop doing it. And there's going to be less work for humans, and that's going to cause problems in a lot of ways. In fact, since 2018, two brilliant economists in Boston, one at MIT and then his graduate student who's a professor now at Boston University, they coined this term of so-so automation. It's good enough to get the labor cost out, but it doesn't improve the capability of the process. You don't get the capacity increase. You're not able to do new things. You're not using the productivity effect to create more demand, either for your existing products, which then have knock-on effects of driving growth in other ways, or for new services. When we get this productivity effect, we always create new demand. That's why here we are in this, year 2021, and if you take modern times, be it 2019, 2020, 2021, forget COVID, set that aside for a moment. We have more automation than ever. And we have more people employed than ever. Why? Because of the productivity effect. Because we've been able to create new goods and services. We've been able to do new things in new ways, exactly because we did more than just replace the labor cost. We pushed it. And if we put it in and got the productivity increase, we continue driving ourselves to be able to do new things. All right. That's important. If we don't do that as if each company doesn't do that, somebody who does do it will beat you. If we don't do it as a society, then we will have all the things people worry about with increased degrees of automation. If we go for the productivity effect, we can bring in all the automation we want. We will never stop creating new jobs. And when you create new stuff, it's always labor intensive for the initial decades. All right. So putting humans and machines together, that's sort of my passion. And even though we know a lot about this, we've been doing it for centuries. We've been doing it with computers since the 50s. There's more to it now because the range of what the machines can do is obviously different. And the nature of the so-called cognitive automation takes us into new realms. A lot of you, if you've been working for years, you have fairly deep ingrained assumptions of what computers can do and what people should do and the respective roles of both. But with this new wave of AI-enabled machines, that has to change. And at the same time, you don't want to over-ascribe to the machines what they can do because they're tools. They have limits. All right. And just a reminder, everybody, really, it all comes back to basics. The basics of how do I do continuous improvement, including productivity improvement? And that's an old idea. Just, you'll recognize this. It's been around a while, this Shewhart cycle, Deming cycle, and as well as how do we outmaneuver the competition? Of course, management has lots of ways to summarize that, but I use this OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, which is not for continuous improvement. It's for how to outmaneuver so that you can read your competitors' intentions faster than they can read yours, and you'll cycle through and you have competitive advantage. And how do we do this combination to come back to these basics so that we can operate better? So I'm done. Now, I'm just going to tell you your goodies, right? So this stuff's all for you. That for every one of my examples, boom, 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 I have a few sentence case, what's the use case? So if you order the slides, you get these descriptions. And if you Google future of work and the title of the thing, you'll find most of them in Tom Davenport's page. You need to be aware of the MIT Work of the Future Task Force. They did a marvelous job. Here's their final report. Here's the task force home. What were their two leading conclusions? Same as our 30 case studies. The work is not going away. This change is simultaneously replacing and creating. It's not eliminating work together. And the more that we put the focus on productivity improvement versus just labor costs, we will get more of the creation than more of the elimination. And they go into detail about the momentous changes. But in terms of work organizations, factories, fields, offices, it's unfolding slowly because of some of the issues I had talked about. They go into labor market issues. In the United States, they have continued to experience productivity and wage increase, but it's been so unequally distributed that we have all the political problems that we have now in the United States. Do you want to see that in your company? Do you want to see that in your country? No. Make sure that the people who have to participate in being the users and in the middle and the bottom of the chain in terms of the salary scale in your companies, make sure they share the benefits of this productivity improvement. Again, that's why you need to do more than just labor cost replacement. You have to create a bounty. We've got to create some giveaways so we can share it through the value chain. And they have some policy recommendations for going forward. The grandfathers, the godfathers of deep learning, Bengio, Joshua Bengio, Jan LeCun, Jeffrey Hinton, they're the ones who in the 70s, 80s, 90s, in the early 2010s, they made the scalable deep learning that we're all experiencing now. They were the ones who led the methods, decades toiling on this. And they won the Turing Prize in 2018. Over 2019, 2020, they did their obligatory Turing lecture. All three of them did a different lecture. And just recently, July 2021, in the communications of the ACM, they put a summary, no equations, mind you, about just fundamental things you need to understand about deep learning, some of the comparisons between that and symbolic AI, and some of the limitations. And here we are, the most insightful people on the planet about deep learning. And they're telling you that, of course, even as we continue to scale this, these systems will get more powerful, like the GPT-3 example. But on the other hand, there are aspects of capability and intelligence that scaling just cannot address. And they give some examples here. I won't go 1, 2, and 3. But item 3 is especially interesting because what they're saying is the deep learning and the symbolic AI need to come together. So it isn't just the deep learning. So you've got to think about a multiplicity of models, and the good old-fashioned AI doesn't go away. Just the other day, 16th August, Stanford University did the world a huge favor, and they put out this discussion paper, tutorial paper on foundation models. It's written in plain English. It's got beautiful graphics, 2 of which I borrowed right here. What do they mean by foundation models? That's like this GPT-3 thing that I've mentioned a few times. They can be trained on gigundous data sets, gigantic, from the world, watch everything on YouTube, take in everything on Wikipedia, everything that can be assimilated, and they pre-train. And then you take that model and then you take it into a particular domain and you fine tune. These things are really powerful. They're really new. It's only within the last few years that these have come out, and they've blown away all kinds of benchmarks. Are they artificial general intelligence? No. But do they push the capability frontier tremendously? Yes. Will they keep on improving? The Stanford people, their purpose in writing this paper was to help you understand the sort of implications and risks and challenges, item 5. But in order to get to that, they did a tutorial on the capabilities and the technology. This will be the best tutorial that you can get now that explains in plain accessible English what this new generation of models are. Why wouldn't you want to have your company get this and download it? Tom and I just put out a little piece in Asian Management Insights from SMU, where we summarize some of our conclusions from these 4 of our insights chapters. So boom, just go download it, read it, easy to read. It's a management-oriented paper, will help some of you. A few years ago, I worked with the CIO and head of technology at Changi Airport, and I did a write-up on some of their marquee AI projects. These go back to 2019, but even if you're doing AI applications that are different than these 3 applications, what comes out is you can't just take stuff out of the box. A lot of contextualization and domain knowledge is required. So it's a great story. And, you know, before COVID sort of brought them to their knees, Changi Airport, the world's greatest airport for year after year after year, great team. I've inherently physical organization that did a tremendous job with digital transformation. And some of the lessons learned about doing that are summarized in this companion paper, part 2, that's only online. Why not benefit from the distilled knowledge and experience of the Changi Airport team about managerial insights of doing this? If you're just getting started, this will help you. Even if you're an expert, there'll be other people in your organization who will benefit from reading this. A few years back, I did this thing about augmentation and automation. So more up-to-date examples are available, so you won't care about the first part. But the bit about how employees need to adapt, rethinking the relationship between humans and machines, the imperative of a new human-machine symbiosis, the statement in there is still quite up-to-date and nicely stated. And finally, look at Tom Davenport's website. The guy is so prolific. You know, he's had these business blockbusters like competing on analytics. So in 2022, you know, I have the privilege of co-authoring with this work here on him. He's got another book he's working on AI superstar firms that will come out in 2022 or 2023. Go to his website, look at the articles. He's always talking to chief digital officers, chief data officers, chief analytics officers, CEOs, CIOs, and he writes for the management crowd. You know, he's not going to tell you how to implement a neural network, but he's talking to people all the time. So it's a good way to get shared experience. You might as well go look at, you know, the articles that he's done. And I thank you all. You know, thanks. It's a little over. I said it will take about 2 hours, 20 minutes. Exactly. If you want to follow up, you know, I encourage you to get the slides. If you want the help of a great graphics artist, here's the person, Nicole, on the bottom left. She helped me with my visualizations. People want professional help. You know, I do some advisory work. So I wish you the best, and back over to the SMU LKCSB people.
Thank you.